Hello, travelers. Welcome back to Reach the World. For over 20 years, Reach the World has used virtual exchange to inspire youth to become curious, confident global citizens. My name is Tim, and as part of Reach the World's efforts to support educators and families during the COVID-19 pandemic, we're sharing free live stream discussions with some of our standout travelers from recent years. You can find an updated calendar of live stream events and much more at athome.reachtheworld.org. Today, I'm very excited to be talking with Fulbright scholar Lauren Peace. Lauren shared her experiences as a journalist and oral history researcher in Pristina, Kosovo through a recent Reach the World virtual exchange. And I'm really happy to welcome her back to talk some more about her time in Kosovo. If you haven't already read Lauren's virtual exchange articles from Kosovo, I'd highly recommend them. We'll add a link in the YouTube chat bar so you can click right over. She's got some great articles and photos and videos from her time there, and I'd very highly recommend them. Also, please use the YouTube chat bar to let us know you're here today, and please share any questions you may have for Lauren as we go. We'll try to get to as many as we can, and without any further ado, let's go on a journey to Kosovo. Welcome, Lauren.
Hi, thanks so much for having me.
You bet. Great to have you. Do you want to just get us started today by introducing yourself and telling us how you first sort of started thinking about going abroad or traveling abroad and how that came about for you?
Yeah, definitely. So my name is Lauren Peace. I'm originally from Morgantown, West Virginia. And I grew up in sort of an interesting home. My mom is Lebanese, my dad is English, and I grew up in Appalachia. So it was sort of this weird mix of cultures and identities from the get-go. I went to school in Western New York. And as a journalist, I was always somebody who was sort of curious about experiences and people and places outside of what I was familiar with. And so when I got to college, I wasn't so much looking for the opportunity to go abroad as I was just the opportunity to tell really good and interesting stories. And I, Tim, I've said this before, and I think I talk about it a little bit on my traveler page, but I got lucky with Kosovo. It wasn't this place that I had dreamed of going. I just had a professor who was on her way there to do sort of documentary work, and I was in the right place at the right time, and got invited along initially for 6 weeks, a 6-week trip. And during those 6 weeks, I was just totally captured by the place. And before I left, I knew I would apply for a Fulbright to go back for a longer period of time.
Cool. I love the part about your story where Kosovo was a little bit of a surprise to you, and it grew on you to the point where now you have this like real deep relationship and understanding of the country. Had you done much travel before you went to Kosovo?
So I had done a bit of travel before, never by myself and never for professional purposes. I had traveled to visit my family. Like I said, I have family in Lebanon and family in England. So I had some experience traveling prior to going, but it was nothing like what I experienced when I went to Kosovo for the first time.
Yeah, and I'm curious to know what your first impressions of Kosovo were when you landed that first time. What did you think?
I saw the mountainous landscape and I thought, oh my goodness, this looks a little bit like Appalachia and like West Virginia. And that for me, it's a theme, that I write about throughout the journey page, was what I think really drew my interest and made me feel connected to the place and to the people and want to go back. So I was shocked. I was surprised. I knew sort of very little about Kosovo and about the Balkans as a region prior to going. And as I read more and more about it in preparation to go, I really only had a short period of time between when I decided I would go and when I actually got there the first time. I was just sort of, I was surprised by how little I knew about the place and how sort of relevant the history was to my own experiences and within sort of the framework of my life. So yeah, that was a big thing for me, is finding the ties between Kosovo and between West Virginia while I was there.
Where did you stay when you lived there on your Fulbright grant?
So I stayed in Pristina, which is the capital city. I was in a sort of small apartment just in the center of the city. And Pristina it's a really interesting place. It's small and it's walkable, but it's in a valley. And so you sort of have this mountainscape surrounding it. And Pristina sits in the middle. And from the center of the city where I lived, you could look up and you could see the rest of the city sort of built into the hills of the surrounding area, which was great. But so I lived in Pristina, and Kosovo is sort of it's like a circle. It's sort of a roundish shape, and Pristina is right in the center of it. And lining the periphery of the country are sort of the other major cities. So I was right at the center of the country, and I did most of my work in Pristina, but I would frequently take bus trips to the other cities, sort of there and back in a day, for my work.
So you could get most places in Kosovo in a day's round trip bus journey?
Yeah, and that's one of my favorite things about it is it's so small from the center to sort of the border. At most you're going to be driving 2-ish hours, and that's also because you're winding through hills as you go. It's not necessarily a direct route, so it's a really small place, and it's really accessible by bus. Public transportation is oddly so much better than it is. I was just living in New York City, but than it is in West Virginia in my home. Really, people get everywhere by bus, and I would frequently take sort of the bus out in the morning. It would take me an hour to two, and then I would take it back in the evening if I needed to get back to my home.
Interesting. I know you were doing some oral history research and journalism as part of your Fulbright grant. Can you tell us a little bit about your project?
Yeah, so I made it's hard to classify. So you were saying journalism and oral history. It's sort of its own entity. I've been describing it as an interactive documentary project, because it is a piece of work that people are supposed to sort of see in person in the same way that you would see a museum exhibition. But I went to Kosovo thinking that I was going to write magazine stories about women in Kosovo who were acting as catalysts for change, just women that I really admired and who were doing really sort of mover and shaker type work. And when I got there, things didn't play out exactly as planned. I was flexible, and I ended up doing a photo series of 99 women in Kosovo who had something unique about them. So there were female athletes, there were politicians across various ethnic groups, and then that photo series was displayed in a public place in June at the end of my Fulbright grant for a week. And people were able to walk up to the photos, scan the photos, and get sort of a little video of the woman speaking. So
Cool.
that does that sum it up? Yeah.
Yeah, that's very interesting. So it's kind of a art installation also?
Yeah, it definitely was. And a big thing that I thought about going in was how are people going to see my work? And going in as an individual, I thought, okay, well, I can write these stories and then I can maybe, see them printed in a magazine or self-publish. But my concern was really, how am I going to get this work in front of the people who it's supposed to be in front of? And so, putting it up large scale in public where people sort of couldn't ignore it was the solution I came to, and so that's what we did.
Cool. I assume that as part of that project, you got to meet a lot of really interesting people and speak to interesting people. And because you were in a different country, did you need to speak a different language, or how did language play into that process?
Yeah, so I started taking Albanian lessons. In Kosovo, they speak Albanian. There is sort of multiple languages in the region because there's a Serbian population too. So you get two languages within this really small country. But for practical purposes, I was learning Albanian. I had tried to learn a little bit of Albanian before I went. And I didn't have much success with it because not only is Albanian a rare language, but there are multiple dialects of it that vary drastically from each other. So I didn't really start learning the language practically until I was there. Once I was there, I started taking lessons. I would take them twice a week for sort of 2 or 3 hours. But I had heard people talk about learning language before I went, and how, oh, if you're just immersed in it, you'll start to pick it up. And I had never really believed that. And lo and behold, I found it to be totally true. My life was just Albanian all the time. And I remember there was this moment I was sitting in a coffee shop by myself, sort of drinking coffee. And I realized this must have been, it was a few months into my project, but I realized that I was eavesdropping on the table next to mine. And prior to that, it had just sort of been myself sitting and there being ambient noise and sound around me. And that moment of sitting there and realizing that I was paying attention to the conversation at the table next to me that was taking place in Albanian was like a huge, huge breakthrough. So yeah, but for my project, I did some of the interviews in English, and then when they were done in Albanian or in Serbian, I would have translators, just because I wanted to make sure that that the stories I were getting were accurate.
Yeah. How did you go about finding your subjects?
Ooh, that was it was tricky. It took some time. Thankfully, I was there for close to a year. And I did have the time, because for the first sort of, I expected to go over and to hit the ground running, and to, within the first 2 weeks have interviews set up and be recording and know exactly what I was doing with my project. And I got there and I realized, I was in a place that, although I had been there before, I had been there in the context of a really large support system. I went with a professor who had contacts, and I was there for a short period of time. And now I was there on my own, without those sort of initial connections. And it was really hard. So it took sort of 3 months for me just being in the place, getting to know people, not in a transactional way, because I found that if you just show up and say, "Hey, I'd love to talk to you about my story," it's not the best way to get people to open up. And so I spent a lot of time initially just meeting people, just going to events, just living and really being a resident of the community that I was in and a part of the community. And then about the 3-month point, I had spent enough time and met enough people and made enough friends that I started to, throw my project around and say, "Hey, do you know anyone who I might be able to speak to for this?" And then through word of mouth, through research, through connections, I was able to build sort of a wide net of sources.
Yeah, that's a great just illustration of something we see a lot when travelers are coming to live in a place and trying to integrate into the local community and be involved in a meaningful way. I think you have a great example of just getting out there and working on your language skills and meeting some people and showing your face, and it sounds like you were able to build relationships with people in a really deep way. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, and I would just add to that, for anybody who's thinking about traveling or about taking on an experience like this, is you have to be patient with yourself. We go in with these high, huge expectations, and you just have to be flexible and willing to adapt. And when things take more time than you had hoped or wanted them to, you just have to know that that's totally normal.
Yeah.
It's part of the experience.
Was there anything that surprised you about life in Pristina that you didn't anticipate, or that the difference between sort of visiting and living there long term snuck up on you?
Yeah. Oh gosh, so many things. I mean, we could boil it down to as simple as like the number of stray dogs and the friendliness of those dogs. Those little sort of life details that you don't think about and that don't really serve a huge purpose, but become a really ordinary part of your life. There's a huge stray dog population in Pristina, but they're friendly and they're wandering around, and they rely mostly on on, scraps that people leave and on garbage sometimes. And so when I first got there, I was like, what on earth is going on? And by the time I left and came back to the US, I found myself saying, wow, I miss all the dogs. But then, learning to pay an electricity bill. The bill would come to my door, and the first time it came, I had to figure out, what on earth do I do with this? And lo and behold, I had to walk it down the street to a vendor and pay it there. So little sort of everyday life things that you don't think about when you're not living in a place, when you're just visiting it. Navigating those was really interesting. I think the other piece of it was understanding culturally that it's a really warm and inviting place as a visitor. There's a lot of sort of people welcome you into their homes or to get a coffee, and you sit and you take a long time. It's a slower pace of life, but it's also sort of taboo to really open up and let people into your personal business. They're a lot more closed off than we are in the US. And as a journalist, that was something that I wasn't expecting, and that was a real barrier and challenge, because I sort of took the openness, the initial openness and warmth and invitation as a sign that it would be easy to get people to open up and tell me more personal details. And it was really the opposite.
Awesome. I want to just pause real quick and let our live stream viewers and any viewers who may be watching the recorded version of this talk with Lauren remind you that we've got a link in the sidebar chat to Lauren's virtual exchange that she did with a classroom back in the United States, sharing her experiences that we're talking about right now through a bunch of great written articles on all aspects of Kosovo life and culture. And I encourage you to follow that link whenever you see it or whenever you have time, and read some of the articles, because we're going to loop back around and talk with Lauren again in a couple weeks. And she's such a great source of information about Kosovo and really all things getting out there and exploring new cultures. I want to dive into food, Lauren, because I really don't know the answer to this question. What are some of the highlights of the cuisine in Kosovo?
Yeah, so Kosovo cuisine is really, it's filling, it's thick, it's sort of heavy. There's a lot of really incredible fresh breads that you pair with meats and different sauces that you dip into. There's a pepper spread called Ivar, which is kind of like a hummus, but it's red roasted pepper sort of ground up, and it's amazing with bread. There's something called Space Memaz, a lot of peppers. You'll find that the theme is a lot of peppers, which is roasted peppers in a white cheese sauce, again, paired with bread, but a lot of meat. And that for me was a challenge because I'm a vegetarian. So I can't tell you so much about that. But there were a lot of sausages and a lot of really just fresh produce. That was the other great thing, is the region, not necessarily Kosovo, but the surrounding region does have good farmland. And so I would buy all of my vegetables from a vegetable stand, really fresh, really delicious, and great.
Yeah, is there anything that's considered a national dish, or is everywhere when you look around?
Yeah, space mimaz is something that people eat often. Borak is another. It's sort of it's a phyllo dough. So think about maybe a croissant wrapped in a tight circle. So think about a croissant dough in a cinnamon roll presentation, but instead of the cinnamon, it's filled with meats. It's filled with cheese and spinach, and that you can get everywhere. There are sort of borak shops everywhere, and for really low prices when we're comparing it to US costs. So you could go and you could get a borak, a spinach and cheese borak for, I think, 70 cents. And they're everywhere and they're open all the time.
Great. That sort of brings up the question, what kind of money were you spending? Like, what is the currency that is used there?
Yeah, so the currency, Kosovo is really interesting because they use the euro. They aren't part of the EU, but Kosovo is a really young country, and when they broke off from Serbia and from former Yugoslavia, in 2008, they adopted the euro. And so I was using the euro while I was there, but cost of living compared to cost of living in the US and compared to cost of living in a lot of Europe is really low. So that was something that was interesting to find.
Interesting. Yeah, I want to move on and talk a little bit about like the arts and culture, whether or not there were some examples you could share with us of music or clothing or some other aspect of culture that might, someone who may have seen it somewhere might say, oh, make the connection today that is linked to the country of Kosovo.
Yeah. Oh goodness, I don't want to sort of say this the wrong way. So the music is really the modern music, which is different from the traditional music, it's hip hoppy and sort of there's a lot of Albanian rap, a lot of Albanian hip hop, not necessarily what you would expect going over, but in almost all of the borak shops, which is the food that I was talking about, there are TVs that are playing music videos the whole time, and you get music videos similar to those that you would find on MTV. So there's sort of a really young and fun dance culture. Kosovo's population in general is really, really young. The average age, I think, is late 20s or early 30s. And so on the more modern sense, there's that really fun, exciting hip-hoppy rap kind of vibe. Traditional music sounds kind of, and I'm making this connection again because of my Lebanese and sort of Middle Eastern background, but it sounds a lot like Middle Eastern music to me. There's an instrument, and I'm blanking on the name right now. I can send you a photo after, maybe you can share it with people, but it's a long guitar-like instrument that only has 2 strings and a really sort of rounded banjo-like almost center. And that's played a lot in traditional music. As far as dress goes, the outfits are really, I mean, they're beautiful. They're long and flowy, red vests. Older men wear these sort of white round woolen hats that sit on top of their heads. And although those are traditional hats, you'll actually, walking down the main boulevard, see some of the older men sitting on the benches wearing them still. Yeah.
Huh, interesting. After you really sort of became comfortable in Pristina, I wonder, it sounds like you had the opportunity to visit other places, both around Kosovo and maybe regionally too. What were some of the highlights outside of Pristina?
Yeah, so within Kosovo, Mitrovica is a really, really interesting city because I talked about this a little bit earlier, but Kosovo is unique in that there's a Serbian population and an Albanian population. And as such, there's Serbian pieces of the country and predominantly Albanian ethnic groups, pieces of the country. And so Mitrovica is at the northern part of Kosovo, and it is divided by a river that runs through it. And the northern part of the country or of the city is predominantly Serbian. So you cross the bridge and you're working with a different currency. There's a different language. It's a slightly, although very similar, slightly different culture. And the southern part of the river is Albanian. So you're working with a euro, and people are speaking Albanian. And it's a really interesting place to be because of the proximity and because genuinely you just walk across the bridge. Now there's controversy within that and sort of a little bit of regional turmoil that is getting better with time because the division dates back to the war. But that is probably by far my favorite place in Kosovo. As far as within the region, we were all over. I was actually just looking at photos today, and a year ago we being a group of Fulbrighters had rented a car, and we drove from Kosovo down to Greece. So we went through Macedonia, which is to the southern border of Kosovo, and into Greece. And it was beautiful. The coastal area of the Balkans is beaches and mountains and just really some of the most beautiful landscape that I've ever seen.
Wow, that sounds lovely. I have a guess from somebody online as to what the two-stringed instrument is, and I'm not going to be able to pronounce this right.
Okay.
And I know that you're not an expert in instruments,
I
but
know,
let's give
I'm
this a
worried.
try.
I don't know if
So
I'll
I
get.
see a letter C with like a little comma off the bottom.
Okay.
And then the rest of the word is ifteli, sifteli.
Chifteli?
Does that ring a
Okay.
bell?
Is that, yes, the C makes, yes, that is it. I've just Googled it. Okay, Chifteli. Yes, you know what's weird is I'm looking at it now and I don't actually think that I don't think that I ever actually used the word for it while I was there. I knew the word for it. But yes, that if you
All right.
Google that, that's 100% the instrument I was talking about.
Fantastic. All right. Good work, online audience. We found it. I want to close. We have about 4 more minutes to go, and I have always found your sort of journey and experiences very inspiring, especially for younger people who are trying to envision what a life, an adult life that involves adventure and travel, and incorporating other cultures and perspectives into their own. And I wonder what advice you have for people who are in middle school or late elementary school or even high school. Some of the things they can do to get on a path where living abroad in another country could be a possibility for them, just like it was for you.
Yeah, that's a great question. We were just talking about this before the chat started, but I think one of the really great things that this quarantine, this sort of current situation is showing us is that we can access various parts of the world without leaving our desktop computer. So I would encourage sort of middle schoolers to just be curious and get online and Google and if there's, when I first learned about Kosovo, it was like I dropped a needle on a piece of the world and then just zoomed in and kept zooming until I was familiarized with it. So do that, if you have time on your hands, open up Google Maps and as though you're spinning the globe, pick a spot and delve into it and see if it's, piques your curiosity. The other thing is ask your teachers to be resources for you. Really, if you have an interest in learning more about the world, ask your teachers what opportunities are available, whether it's being part of a program like Reach the World, or as you get older, looking for funding opportunities, for scholarships, for grants to help students travel abroad. Just know that those opportunities exist, because I don't know that I did going into school, and I know that a lot of my peers who ended up abroad certainly didn't. But knowing that what seems like an impossibility can become a possibility really quickly if you tap into the right resources.
Awesome. I feel like that sort of summarized is, if there's a will, there's a way to make it happen. So many great financial aid opportunities, and through the Gilman Scholarship, the Fulbright organization, there's just so many great people sending students abroad. So I really want to thank you for being such a great example for young people who are interested in the world. We're going to have a chance in a couple weeks to come back around and talk to Lauren. And in the meantime, anybody who's joining us on today's call who thought of a question but was maybe too shy to ask it this time, you'll have a chance again in a couple weeks, and we'll update Lauren's next call on our events page at athome.reachtheworld.org. And so to sign off, I always, Lauren, with anybody that we connect with through a live stream event, I like to ask if you, when the COVID-19 restrictions are lifted and the world is open for actual exploration, physical exploration again, what is one place that's on your radar that you'd like to go?
Ooh, that is a great question. So I'm gonna give sort of a maybe an answer that won't be so interesting to the students, but I'm heading back home to West Virginia for a job and for work, and it's been a while since I've really just spent time exploring the region that I grew up in and my home, and so I'm more than anything right now looking forward to getting back home and for the social distancing restrictions to be lifted so that I can wander around, Appalachia and the place that I grew up.
Very cool. Well, thank you so much, Lauren. I want to thank our entire YouTube live stream audience today for joining us. Please join us again. We've got so many exciting Reach the World live stream events left to go this week. You can find a complete list of upcoming Reach the World events at home.reachtheworld.org. And thank you again, Lauren. Hope everybody has a great day.
Thanks so much, Tim.